My husband texted, "Happy anniversary," while I sat 2 tables away watching him kiss her. My name is Rachel, and I am 34 years old. For 8 years I believed I had the perfect marriage. I trusted my husband with every fiber of my being. But on our anniversary night, everything shattered. I sat in a restaurant just 2 tables away from him, watching him kiss another woman. And right at that moment, my phone buzzed. It was a text from him saying, "Happy anniversary, darling." He had no idea I was there. What happened next changed my life forever. Before I share the rest of this story, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. If you believe in loyalty and standing up for yourself, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Trust me, you will want to stay for what comes next, because the way I handled this betrayal is something I never thought I had in me. To understand how I ended up sitting in that restaurant watching my husband betray me, I need to take you back to the beginning. Back to when I truly believed Marcus was the love of my life. I met Marcus at a marketing conference in Chicago when I was 26 years old. I had just started my career as a freelance graphic designer, and I was attending the conference to network and find potential clients. Marcus was there representing his company as a regional sales director. He was 31 at the time, tall, with dark brown hair that was always perfectly styled, and these intense brown eyes that seemed to look right through you. I remember the exact moment I first saw him. He was standing near the coffee station adjusting his tie while scrolling through his phone. Something about the way he carried himself caught my attention. He looked confident but not arrogant. When he noticed me looking, he smiled and walked over to introduce himself. We talked for almost an hour that first day. He asked about my work, genuinely interested in my designs and my creative process. Most people at those conferences just wanted to talk about themselves, but Marcus was different. He listened. He asked follow-up questions. He remembered every detail I shared. By the end of the conference, we had exchanged numbers. He called me 2 days later, and we talked for 3 hours. Within a month, we were officially dating. He would drive 4 hours from his apartment in Denver to visit me in Kansas City almost every weekend. He sent flowers to my apartment randomly just because he was thinking of me. He wrote me handwritten letters that I kept in a box under my bed. After 2 years of dating, Marcus proposed on a beach in California during a sunset that painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. I said yes, without hesitation. I was 28, and I had never been more certain of anything in my life. We got married in a small ceremony with about 50 guests. My parents flew in from Ohio. His mother came from Florida. It was intimate and perfect. I wore a simple white dress that I had designed myself, and Marcus cried when he saw me walking down the aisle. After the wedding, I moved to Denver to be with him. We bought a small house in the suburbs, a charming 3-bedroom with a backyard and a little garden where I planted roses. I set up my design studio in the spare bedroom, working from home while Marcus traveled for his job. Those first few years were everything I had dreamed of. Marcus would call me every single night when he was on business trips. Sometimes we would talk for just 10 minutes, sometimes for over an hour. He always wanted to know about my day, my projects, my thoughts. When he came home, he would bring me little gifts from wherever he had been. A keychain from Dallas, a scarf from San Francisco, a snow globe from Seattle. We had our routines and our rituals. Sunday mornings were for pancakes and lazy conversations in bed. Wednesday nights were date nights, even if we just ordered pizza and watched a movie on the couch. We talked about having children someday, maybe when I turned 35, and my career was more established. I trusted Marcus completely. When he said he was working late, I believed him. When he said his business trips were exhausting but necessary, I supported him. When he came home tired and distant sometimes, I attributed it to the stress of his job. I never once questioned his loyalty. I never once checked his phone or his emails. I never once doubted that I was the only woman in his life. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was. But at the time, I had no reason to suspect anything. Marcus had never given me a reason to doubt him. He was attentive and loving. He remembered our anniversaries and birthdays. He told me he loved me every single day. About 2 years before that fateful anniversary dinner, Marcus came home one evening and told me that his company was expanding into the Southwest region. He would need to travel more frequently, spending time in Arizona and New Mexico to develop new client relationships. I was disappointed but understanding. His career was important, and I wanted to support his success. The trips became more frequent. Instead of traveling twice a month, he was gone almost every week. Sometimes for 2 days, sometimes for 4. He always called every night just like before. He always came home with gifts and stories about difficult clients and long meetings. I missed him terribly when he was away, but I filled my time with work and friends. My freelance business was growing. I had regular clients who appreciated my designs and referred me to others. I joined a book club with some women in the neighborhood. I started taking yoga classes at a studio downtown. Life was good. Different from what I had imagined, but still good. I told myself that this phase would not last forever. Eventually, the Southwest expansion would be complete, and Marcus would travel less. We would have more time together. Maybe we would finally start trying for that baby we had talked about. I had no idea that while I was planning our future, Marcus was building a completely different life with someone else. I had no idea that those business trips to Arizona were not just about work. I had no idea that the man I had trusted for 8 years was capable of such devastating betrayal. But I was about to find out. The first crack appeared so subtly that I almost missed it entirely. It was about 6 months before our anniversary during a warm spring evening in April. Marcus had just returned from a 4-day trip to Phoenix. He walked through the front door looking exhausted, his tie loosened, and his jacket slung over his arm. I greeted him with a hug and a kiss asking about his trip. He gave me the usual responses. Long meetings, difficult negotiations, hotel food that left much to be desired. We were sitting on the couch catching up over glasses of wine when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and something flickered across his face. It was brief, barely a second, but I noticed it. He excused himself and walked out to the backyard to take the call. Through the window, I watched him pace back and forth near my rose garden. He was talking animatedly, his free hand gesturing in the air. The call lasted almost 15 minutes. When he came back inside, he said it was a client who needed reassurance about a contract. I accepted his explanation without question. Clients called at odd hours sometimes. That was part of his job. But something about the way he had looked at his phone stayed with me. That flicker of something I could not quite identify. A few weeks later, I noticed that Marcus had changed the passcode on his phone. We had always known each other's passcodes, not because we snooped through each other's devices, but because it was convenient. Sometimes I would use his phone to call mine when I misplaced it. Sometimes he would ask me to check a text while he was driving. When I mentioned it casually asking what his new code was, he hesitated for just a moment before saying that his company had implemented a new security policy. All employees were required to use unique passcodes that they could not share with anyone, not even spouses. It was for data protection purposes. It sounded reasonable enough. Many companies had strict policies about information security. I nodded and dropped the subject. But that hesitation bothered me. It was so brief, so subtle that I wondered if I had imagined it. The small changes continued to accumulate. Marcus started taking more calls in private, stepping outside or into another room. He spent more time on his laptop in the evenings, saying he needed to catch up on emails and reports. He seemed distracted during our conversations, his eyes drifting to his phone, even when we were supposed to be having quality time together. One Sunday morning, a day that was supposed to be sacred for us, I woke up to find Marcus already out of bed. He was in the kitchen, typing rapidly on his phone. When I walked in, he quickly put the phone face down on the counter and smiled at me, asking if I wanted coffee. I told myself I was being paranoid. Marcus was under a lot of pressure at work. The Southwest expansion was demanding. He was probably just stressed and overwhelmed. I needed to be supportive, not suspicious. But then came the incident that I could not ignore. It was a Thursday evening in late May. Marcus was in the shower, and his phone was on the nightstand charging. I was sitting on the bed reading a book when the phone lit up with a text notification. I did not intend to read it. I just happened to glance over at the right moment. The message preview showed a few words before cutting off. It said, "Miss you already. Cannot wait until." The sender was listed simply as V. My heart stopped. I stared at the screen until it went dark again. Miss you already. Those words echoed in my mind. Who was V? Why were they sending my husband such an intimate message? When Marcus came out of the shower, I asked him about it as casually as I could manage. I mentioned that his phone had buzzed while he was showering, and that I had seen a message from someone named V. Marcus laughed a sound that seemed just slightly forced. He explained that V was Veronica, a colleague who was part of his Southwest team. They were working on a major project together, and she was just being dramatic about him leaving Phoenix after their latest meeting. She missed the whole team, not just him. It was an inside joke about how much they all hated being apart after spending long days together. He seemed so relaxed, so unbothered by my question, that I felt foolish for even asking. Of course, there was an innocent explanation. I was reading too much into a simple text message, but the doubt had been planted. It was small, like a tiny seed, but it was there. And once doubt takes root, it is very hard to dig out. A few days later, I mentioned the situation to my best friend Diane during our weekly coffee date. Diane and I had been friends since college. She was sharp and observant, the kind of person who noticed things others missed. She was also fiercely protective of me. When I told her about the changes in Marcus and the text message, she did not dismiss my concerns. Instead, she looked at me with serious eyes and said that I should pay attention. She said that when something feels off in a marriage, it usually is. I brushed off her warning. I told her that Marcus would never cheat on me. We had been together for almost 10 years if you counted our dating years. He had never given me any real reason to distrust him. Diane was just being overprotective. But Diane shook her head. She reminded me that she had seen this before with her sister, whose husband had seemed perfect until the day she discovered he had a whole other family in another state. She told me that cheaters were often the best liars, the most charming deceivers. I drove home that day feeling unsettled. Diane's words kept replaying in my head. But when Marcus came home that evening, with flowers and a smile when he kissed me, and asked about my day when he held me close, and told me how much he had missed me, I pushed my doubts aside. I wanted to believe in my marriage. I wanted to believe in my husband. I wanted to believe that 8 years of love and commitment meant something. So I closed my eyes to the warning signs. I ignored the voice in my head that whispered something was wrong. I chose trust over suspicion, love over doubt. It would take several more months for me to finally see the truth, and when I did, it would break me in ways I never imagined possible. 2 weeks before our 8th wedding anniversary, Marcus sat across from me at the dinner table and delivered news that hit me like a punch to the stomach. He had to travel to Phoenix during our anniversary week. A major client was demanding an in-person meeting, and there was no way to reschedule. He was deeply sorry. He would make it up to me when he returned. We could celebrate a few days late, maybe take a weekend trip somewhere special. I tried to hide my disappointment. 8 years was a significant milestone. I had been looking forward to this anniversary for months, imagining a romantic dinner at our favorite restaurant, maybe even a surprise trip to the mountains. But Marcus seemed genuinely upset about the timing, and I did not want to make him feel worse. I told him I understood. Work came first sometimes. We would celebrate when he got back. That night, after Marcus fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Something felt wrong, but I could not pinpoint exactly what. Maybe it was just disappointment clouding my judgment. Maybe I was being unreasonable to expect him to turn down an important client meeting. The next day, Marcus left for a 2-day trip to Albuquerque. He said he had back-to-back meetings and would barely have time to sleep. I kissed him goodbye at the door, told him to be safe, and watched his car disappear down the street. I spent the morning working on a logo design for a new client. Around noon, I realized I needed to send the client some files that were saved on the home computer we shared. Marcus usually used his laptop, but sometimes he worked on the desktop in our shared office. I logged into the computer and navigated to the shared folder where we kept work documents. While searching for the files I needed, I accidentally clicked on a folder I had never noticed before. It was buried deep within a maze of subfolders, almost as if someone had deliberately hidden it. The folder was named MISC Documents. I should have left it alone. I should have grabbed my files and gone back to work. But something made me click on it. Call it intuition. Call it fate. Call it the universe finally forcing me to see what I had been refusing to see. Inside the folder were hundreds of files, emails that had been saved as documents, screenshots of text message conversations, photographs. My hands trembled as I started opening files randomly. The emails were between Marcus and someone named Vanessa. The tone was unmistakably romantic. They called each other baby and sweetheart. They talked about missing each other, about counting the days until they could be together again. I scrolled through message after message, each one more devastating than the last. They had met at a conference in Scottsdale, Arizona about 18 months ago. Vanessa was the marketing director for a company that partnered with Marcus's firm. What started as professional flirtation had quickly become a full-blown affair. They had taken trips together, weekend getaways disguised as business travel, a few days in Sedona, a long weekend in Las Vegas, a week in San Diego that Marcus had told me was a company training retreat. The photographs were the worst part. Marcus and Vanessa at restaurants, their faces close together, smiling. Marcus and Vanessa on a beach, his arm around her waist. Marcus and Vanessa in what looked like a hotel room, her head on his shoulder as they posed for a selfie. Vanessa was beautiful. She looked to be around 30 years old with long brown hair and a confident smile. In every photo she looked at Marcus the way I used to look at him, the way I thought only I looked at him. I do not know how long I sat there staring at the screen. Time seemed to stop. The world around me faded away. All I could see were those images, those words, that undeniable proof of my husband's betrayal. Then I found the email that shattered whatever was left of my heart. It was from 2 weeks ago, sent from Marcus to Vanessa. He was confirming dinner reservations at an upscale restaurant in Phoenix called the Amber Room. The reservation was for our anniversary date. He wrote that he could not wait to celebrate with her, that this would be a night to remember. He was taking her to dinner on our anniversary. While I sat at home alone, believing he was stuck in meetings, he would be whining and dining another woman. He would be celebrating 8 years, but not with me. I closed the laptop and sat in complete silence. I did not cry. I did not scream. I felt nothing. It was as if all my emotions had been sucked out of my body, leaving behind an empty shell. For hours I sat there trying to process what I had discovered. My marriage was a lie. The man I had loved and trusted for nearly a decade had been deceiving me for over 1.5 years. Every kiss, every I love you, every promise he had made during that time had been poisoned by his betrayal. When the shock finally began to fade, something else took its place. Not sadness, not despair. Something colder and more powerful. Determination. I was not going to confront Marcus with tears and accusations. I was not going to give him the chance to lie his way out of this, to gaslight me into thinking I was imagining things. I was not going to be the hysterical wife that he could dismiss and manipulate. No, I was going to be strategic. I was going to catch him in the act, and I was going to make sure he could never deny the truth. I opened the laptop again and started planning. The week leading up to our anniversary was surreal. I went through the motions of normal life while secretly preparing for what I knew would be the most confrontational moment of my existence. Marcus came home from Albuquerque acting as if nothing was wrong. He kissed me, asked about my day, complained about his long meetings. I smiled and nodded and played the role of the unsuspecting wife. Inside, I felt like I was watching a stranger. Every time he touched me, I thought about Vanessa. Every time he said he loved me, I heard the words he had written to her. It took all my strength not to scream the truth in his face, but I held back. I had a plan, and I was going to stick to it. The first thing I did was book my own flight to Phoenix. I found a departing flight that left 2 hours after the one Marcus was scheduled to take. I would arrive in the afternoon, giving me plenty of time to prepare before his dinner reservation at the Amber Room. Next, I made a reservation at the same restaurant. I called and asked specifically for a table that would have a view of the main dining area, but would be somewhat secluded. I told them it was for a special occasion. They were happy to accommodate. I also called a divorce attorney. Her name was Sandra Chen, and she came highly recommended by one of my book club friends, whose sister had gone through a difficult divorce. I explained my situation briefly, and Sandra agreed to prepare preliminary divorce papers. She told me I could have them ready to serve whenever I was ready. The hardest part was keeping everything hidden from Marcus. I had to act normal, had to pretend that I still believed in our marriage. I had to smile and kiss him goodbye, and tell him I would miss him on our anniversary. The performance was exhausting, but necessary. I also confided in Diane. I needed someone to know where I was going and what I was doing. Diane was horrified when I told her about the emails and photographs. She wanted to come with me to Phoenix to be there for support. But I told her this was something I needed to do alone. I needed to face Marcus and Vanessa by myself, to prove to myself that I was strong enough. Diane made me promise to call her as soon as it was over. She also made me promise not to do anything that would get me arrested. I almost laughed at that. I had no intention of causing a scene or resorting to violence. My revenge would be far more dignified. The night before Marcus left for Phoenix, we had dinner together at home. He was charming and attentive, complimenting my cooking, telling me stories about his work. He held my hand across the table and told me how much he wished he could be with me on our anniversary. For a moment, just a brief moment, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think that maybe I had misunderstood the emails, that there was some explanation I had not considered. But I had seen too much. I knew the truth, and no amount of charm could change it. Before bed, Marcus handed me a small box. Inside was a beautiful pair of diamond earrings. He said they were an early anniversary gift, something to remind me of how much he loved me while he was away. I thanked him and kissed him and wore those earrings to bed. In the morning, I put them in my jewelry box. I would return them later. I did not want anything from him anymore. Marcus left for the airport early, promising to call me that night. I watched him drive away, then went upstairs to pack my own bag. My flight was in 4 hours. By evening, I would be in Phoenix. By night, I would be watching my husband dine with his mistress. I was terrified, but I was also ready. I arrived in Phoenix in the late afternoon. The desert heat hit me as soon as I stepped out of the airport, a sharp contrast to the mild spring weather I had left behind in Denver. I took an Uber to a hotel I had booked a few miles from the restaurant, a modest place where I could prepare without any chance of running into Marcus. In my hotel room, I laid out the outfit I had brought specifically for this occasion. It was a black dress that I had never worn before, elegant, but understated. I wanted to look composed and dignified, not like a woman falling apart. I spent an hour doing my hair and makeup, focusing on the routine motions to keep my mind from spiraling. My hands shook slightly, but I forced them to be steady. Tonight, I could not afford to show any weakness. At 7:30, I took another Uber to the Amber Room. The restaurant was exactly as upscale as I had expected. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. White tablecloths covered every table. Soft piano music drifted through the air. The hostess led me to my reserved table tucked in a corner near a large potted plant that provided some concealment. From my seat, I could see most of the dining room, including a prominent table near the center that I suspected Marcus had reserved. I ordered a glass of wine and waited. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every time the front door opened, I held my breath. At exactly 8:00 they walked in. Marcus entered first, holding the door open like a gentleman. He was wearing the charcoal gray suit I had helped him pick out last year, the one I said made him look like a movie star. Behind him came Vanessa. She was even more beautiful in person than in the photographs. Her long brown hair was styled in loose waves that fell over her shoulders. She wore a deep red dress that hugged her figure. When she looked at Marcus, her eyes sparkled with undisguised affection. They were led to the center table just as I had guessed. Marcus pulled out her chair for her the same way he used to do for me when we were dating. He leaned in to kiss her cheek before taking his own seat. I watched them settle in my wine glass, frozen halfway to my lips. It was one thing to read emails and see photographs. It was another thing entirely to witness the betrayal with my own eyes. To see the way Marcus looked at her, the way he touched her hand across the table, the way he laughed at something she said. They ordered champagne. The waiter brought it with ceremony, popping the cork and pouring 2 glasses. Marcus raised his glass to Vanessa, and they clinked their glasses together before drinking. Then he leaned across the table and kissed her a real kiss, lingering and intimate. At that exact moment, my phone buzzed. I looked down at the screen. It was a text from Marcus. "Happy anniversary, darling. Miss you so much. Wish I could be there with you tonight. I love you more than words can say." I read the message 3 times. Then I looked up at my husband, still sitting just 2 tables away. His lips now separated from Vanessa's, but his hand still intertwined with hers. Something inside me shifted. The pain was still there, raw and sharp. But now it was joined by something else. A cold fury. A steely resolve. I picked up my phone and took photographs of them. Multiple shots from different angles. Marcus leaning toward Vanessa. Their hands clasped together. The champagne glasses. Their faces clear and unmistakable. I took a video of them kissing again, capturing their happiness that was built on my devastation. Then I stood up. I straightened my dress. I took a deep breath. and I walked toward their table. Marcus saw me first. I watched the color drain from his face as I approached, his expression shifting from confusion to recognition to pure terror in the span of 2 seconds. Vanessa turned to see what had captured his attention. When she saw me walking toward them, her brow furrowed in confusion. She had no idea who I was. She probably assumed I was a random stranger, maybe someone who recognized Marcus from work. I stopped at their table and looked down at my husband. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. For once in his life, the charming Marcus had nothing to say. I spoke first. My voice was calm, far steadier than I felt inside. I said hello to Marcus and mentioned how lovely it was to find him here at such a beautiful restaurant on our anniversary of all nights. Vanessa's eyes widened. She looked at Marcus, then back at me. I could see the pieces clicking into place in her mind. The anniversary, the wife, the lies she had been told. I reached into my purse and pulled out the manila envelope I had been carrying since I left Denver. Inside were the divorce papers Sandra had prepared. I placed them on the table in front of Marcus next to his champagne glass. I told him those were divorce papers, and that he should read them carefully and sign them at his earliest convenience. I told him my attorney's contact information was inside, and that all future communication would go through her. Marcus finally found his voice. He stammered my name, Rachel, please let me explain. He said it was not what it looked like, that there was more to the story that I did not understand. I held up my hand to stop him. I told him I had seen the emails. I had seen the photographs. I had been watching him for the past 30 minutes, watching him kiss Vanessa and toast champagne and celebrate our anniversary with someone else. I asked him what possible explanation could exist. Vanessa pushed back from the table. Her face had gone pale. She looked at Marcus and asked him if he was married. She asked him why he had told her he was divorced. I almost laughed at that. So he had lied to her too. He had told her he was divorced, free to be with her. She had believed she was in a real relationship, not an affair. We had both been deceived. I looked at Vanessa and told her I was not angry with her. I told her she did not know the truth. But I warned her that if Marcus could lie to his wife of 8 years, he would lie to her too. I told her to think carefully about whether this was the kind of man she wanted. Then I turned back to Marcus. He was sweating now, his perfectly styled hair starting to fall across his forehead. He reached for my hand, but I stepped back. I told him I had been a good wife for 8 years. I had supported him, trusted him, loved him with everything I had. And this was how he repaid me. By sneaking around behind my back. By lying to my face every single day. By planning a romantic dinner with his mistress on our wedding anniversary. I told him I deserved better. I told him I was worth more than his deception. And I told him this was the last time he would ever have the opportunity to hurt me. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I did not cause a scene. I simply stated the facts clear and calm, while the other diners pretended not to watch. Marcus tried one more time. He said he loved me, that Vanessa meant nothing, that he would end things immediately and we could work on our marriage. He begged me to give him another chance. I shook my head. I told him that love does not lie. Love does not betray. What he felt for me was not love. It was possession. It was convenience. It was the comfort of having a devoted wife at home while he played with someone else on the side. I picked up my purse and took one last look at the man I had given 8 years of my life to. He looked pathetic now, slumped in his chair, his facade completely shattered. Vanessa was gathering her things, tears streaming down her face as she realized the extent of his deception. I told Marcus goodbye. Not with anger, but with finality. Then I turned and walked out of the amber room with my head held high. Outside, the desert night air was cool against my skin. I walked a few blocks away from the restaurant before I finally allowed myself to stop. I leaned against a building and pulled out my phone. I called Diane. When she answered, I finally let the tears come. I told her I did it. I told her I confronted him. I told her it was over. Diane stayed on the phone with me for an hour, listening as I cried and talked and processed everything that had happened. She told me she was proud of me. She told me I was the bravest person she knew. She told me that this was not the end, but the beginning. I returned to my hotel that night, exhausted, but strangely at peace. The hardest part was over. Now the healing could begin. The months following that night in Phoenix were some of the most difficult of my life, but also the most transformative. Marcus tried to contact me repeatedly. He called dozens of times. He sent long emails full of apologies and excuses. He showed up at the house begging me to let him in, promising he would change. I refused to engage. All communication went through Sandra, my attorney, just as I had told him it would. The divorce process took 6 months. Marcus fought it at first, dragging his feet on paperwork and trying to negotiate terms that favored him. But I had the evidence. I had the emails, the photographs, the video from that night. When Sandra presented them to his attorney, Marcus's resistance crumbled. In the end, I kept the house. It had been purchased primarily with money I had saved from my freelance work, and the mortgage payments had been coming from a joint account that I contributed to equally. Marcus kept his retirement accounts and his car. We split everything else down the middle. Signing the final divorce papers was surreal. I sat in Sandra's office, pen in hand, and thought about all the promises Marcus and I had made to each other 8 years ago. For better or worse. In sickness and in health. Till death do us part. Those vows had meant everything to me. They had clearly meant nothing to him. When I signed my name on that final line, I expected to feel sad. Instead, I felt free. The first few weeks after the divorce was finalized were hard. I rattled around in our house now, just my house, surrounded by memories of a marriage that had been a lie. Some days I could barely get out of bed. Some nights I lay awake wondering what I had done wrong, what I could have done differently to prevent his betrayal. But slowly, with time and effort, I began to heal. I started by redecorating the house. I painted the walls new colors. I bought new furniture. I ripped out the roses in the backyard and planted sunflowers instead. I erased every trace of Marcus from my living space, creating a home that was entirely my own. I threw myself into my work. I took on more freelance projects than ever before, challenging myself with bigger clients and more complex designs. My business grew. My reputation expanded. Within a year, I had to start turning down projects because I had more work than I could handle. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during my marriage. I joined a hiking group that explored trails in the mountains every weekend. I took a cooking class where I learned to make dishes from around the world. I adopted a rescue dog, a golden retriever mix named Sunny, who became my constant companion. Diane was my rock throughout all of it. She checked on me daily at first, then weekly, as I grew stronger. She celebrated my victories and comforted me during setbacks. She reminded me again and again that Marcus's betrayal was not my fault. It was a reflection of his character, not my worth. The hardest part was learning to trust myself again. For months, I questioned my own judgment. How had I been so blind? How had I missed the signs for so long? What did it say about me that I had been so easily deceived? But eventually I realized that trusting Marcus had not been a weakness. It had been a choice based on the information I had at the time. He had lied, and he had lied well. The fault was his, not mine. My only mistake was believing in someone who did not deserve my belief. About a year after the divorce was finalized, I heard through mutual friends that Marcus and Vanessa had broken up. Apparently, she had discovered that he was cheating on her too, with yet another woman. I felt a brief flicker of satisfaction, then nothing. Marcus was no longer my concern. His patterns were his own to deal with. I focused instead on building the life I wanted. I traveled to places I'd always dreamed of visiting. I spent a month in Italy sketching architecture and eating pasta and falling in love with the world again. I went to Japan during cherry blossom season and felt something bloom inside me too. I learned that happiness was not something someone else could give me. It was something I had to create for myself. And once I understood that, everything changed. Today, I am stronger than I have ever been. I have a thriving business, a home I love, and friends who truly care about me. I have Sunny who greets me every morning with boundless joy. I have a life that is full and meaningful and entirely my own. Do I still think about Marcus sometimes? Yes. Not with longing, but with a kind of distant curiosity about how I ever loved someone so capable of deception. The memories of our good times have faded, replaced by clarity about who he really was. I no longer hate him. Hatred takes energy, and I refuse to waste any more energy on someone who gave me so little truth. Instead, I have found a kind of peace. I understand now that his betrayal was never about me. It was about his own emptiness, his own inability to be honest, his own failures as a human being. The lesson I carry with me is this: never lose yourself for someone who does not value you. Never ignore the voice inside that whispers, "Something is wrong." And never, ever be afraid to walk away from a life that is hurting you, even if it is the only life you know. Sometimes endings are not tragedies. Sometimes they are the doorways to better beginnings. When I walked out of that restaurant in Phoenix, I thought I was losing everything. But really, I was gaining the most important thing of all. I was gaining myself back. So here is my question for you. Have you ever faced a betrayal that forced you to start over? How did you find the strength to rebuild? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Your experiences might help someone else who is going through something similar right now. If this story touched you in any way, please hit that like button. It helps more people discover these stories and know they are not alone. If you want to hear more stories about strength healing and starting over, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. And please share this video with someone who might need to hear it today. You never know who in your life might be silently struggling with their own heartbreak. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I truly appreciate every single one of you. Wherever you are in your journey, whether you are in the middle of pain or coming out the other side, I want you to know that you are stronger than you realize. You deserve honesty. You deserve loyalty. You deserve love that does not lie. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next story.